Okay, so let's go over death and dying. Grief and bereavement, who's taking care of you? So understanding grief, we have to understand that there are definitely fears that go along with grief. So that would be the loss of control, the fear of appearing weak in front of others, let families grieve in private if they need to. Afraid that the tears will never stop, they feel like they're never going to stop crying, unable to bear the loss, help them to take it an hour at a time and remind them of what they have already done to cope. That would, helps encourage them that yes, they can make it through this time. The deceased they're afraid that the deceased will be forgotten. And so things you can do to encourage them with that is encouraging them to keep a daily journal or write a letter to the deceased. Write down details about the person's life and memories of them. These things may give them back some sense of control. All right, understanding grief. Grief is a natural response to someone or something that we love or value. The process to integrate loss into our lives and to say goodbye. Through the process of grief, we can eventually find new meaning in life. And grief is a healthy healing process if we allow it to happen. If the process of grief is blocked, it can lead to depression, chronic pain, and illness. So these are signs and symptoms of blocked grief, of not allowing the person to grieve. All right, there's no simple way to process grief. It just has to be done. One must feel the emotions of grief. It takes courage to face the emotions of grief. Sometimes people don't want to grieve because they don't want to face those emotions of grief. If grief is allowed to be felt by the person, he or she will learn that grief has power to heal and a power to allow one to grow. Okay, so this is an important process when you lose someone. Signs and symptoms of grief. We have emotional, psychological, and cognitive effects. Here's obviously a long list, and it includes more than this, but this is just what we have listed here. Denial, a sense of failure, anger, depression, guilt. That's a huge one. People feel guilty for not being there when they passed away, for not doing everything they said that they were going to do, not spending more time with the person. Irritability, dreams, decreased self-esteem, bitterness, preoccupation with the deceased, just fixated on the fact of the deceased person, fluctuating mood swings. Signs and symptoms of grief, the physical effects. We have exhaustion, fatigue, loss or increased appetite, aching arms. So they can have these true physical symptoms of grief. Restlessness, dry mouth, weight loss or weight gain, breathlessness, shortness of breath, palpitation, sleep problems, lack of strength, muscle weakness, blurred vision, and headaches. And then we can have some social effects. Withdrawal from normal activities, isolation, emotional and physical isolation from the spouse, family, friends, redefining their roles in their life, their public and private life without that person. It can be huge. You're known as that person's significant other, that person's grandchild, that person's child, that person's whatever. Okay, so redefining those roles. Signs and symptoms of grief, the spiritual effects. We've got questioning their core beliefs. Can be a spiritual crisis. Searching for a meaning of the loss. They may change the level of involvement in an organized religion. They may have anger with God or higher power. They have longing for a sense of connectedness. So we have these bereavement, and there are definite stages of bereavement. So be sure that you understand these stages of bereavement and the time frames with the characteristics that go into each stage. So shock and numbness is number one. It's approximately the first 2 weeks. The characteristics are denial, short attention span, difficulty concentrating, impaired decision making, disbelief, time of confusion, of resistance, uncontrolled emotions, including panic and despair. They have a failure to accept reality in the shock and numbness phase. And remember, it just lasts the first 2 weeks. Then you have a searching and yearning. This is from 2 weeks to 4 to 6 months. The time of powerful emotional outbursts that one must encounter in order to heal. So they have anger and bitterness. They have guilt and despair, fear and sadness, failure, loneliness, jealousy, difficult sleeping, impatient, They yearn for what could have been and searching for answers. So I'd like to do this class in person, this lecture in person, so I could ask more questions if anybody's dealt with this type of thing. But, hopefully you guys will talk about this and maybe amongst yourselves to kind of get a better feel. Examples always help you remember things better. And then you've got your stages of bereavement. Number 3, disorientation. So this occurs 6 months to a year, or the anniversary date of the death. The length of time will vary on the individual situation. They start to slowly adapt to life without that person. So most people will find a place in their life and a heart for that person and let go. Characteristics of disorientation: their values have changed. They're reassessing previous values and searching for new meaning. They find it's hard to make decisions. They have little drive and endurance or no energy. Sleeplessness or overpowering need to sleep. Again, loss of appetite or overeating, nervousness or irritability, forgetfulness, insecurity, unresolved feelings of guilt. Remember the stage is 6 months to a year, and they still have unresolved feelings of guilt. Isolate themselves from others in fear that they're not normal because they're still grieving this far out. And physical illness due to prolonged stress. And then we have the 4th stage of bereavement, reorganization. So after 1 or sometimes 2 years, sometimes it takes up to 2 years, a turning point in which there's a sense of release and renewed energy. They make better judgments. The ability to concentrate makes decisions is much better. They have stable eating and sleeping habits, renewed relationships that feel like it's safe to go into a new relationship again. Interest in activities, they have new energy. Moments of equilibrium and peace, and self-confidence increases again. So it's kind of like they're finding themselves, they're allowing to let go, realizing they're not going to forget the person, and figuring out how they're going to work their lives now. So who is taking care of you? Nurses must take care of themselves during times of grief and bereavement too. All right, we tend to think of others first because we are compassionate, caring, sympathetic, and turn to others' needs first. That's what nurses do. But sometimes nurses forget to take care of themselves, okay? So we have to be really diligent in making an effort to do that. So ask yourself, what do you do to take care of yourself? Do you exercise? Do you watch your diet? Do you do relaxation techniques, yoga? What do you do for fun? Do you have hobbies? If you don't have any of these things to be doing to release these stress, this tension, and even if your patient is someone that you weren't real close to, it still affects you tremendously. When you're dealing with these patients that pass away. All right. What gives you fulfillment in your work? So you have to ask yourself all these questions to better know yourself. It's kind of like the culture thing. You have to understand your own beliefs and value systems before you can better appreciate other people. All right, common responses and reactions caregivers experience when working with bereaved families. They feel very drained of energy, sadness, feeling inadequate as caregivers, the wanting to be able to say the right or perfect thing, and that's never going to happen. You don't know what the right or perfect thing is, but being there for them, sometimes it's just sitting there quietly. Feeling overwhelmed, what do you do first? Okay, fearful of causing more pain or distress, and you feel guilty that you couldn't do more. All right, there are times that nurses feel that there's nothing left to give of themselves. And this is a normal reaction to experience. However, if nurses do not support each other and develop good self-care, they become victims of grief out. All right, so how do you avoid grief out? Know the standards of care for grief and loss. Use grief checklists designed by the facility and follow protocol. Delegate tasks of the bereavement protocol. Don't try to do it all by yourself. Especially if you've gotten really close to the patient and they pass away. Sometimes you want to take care of all of it because you knew the patient and the family real well, but you still need to delegate. Share your feelings with a trusted friend, colleague, or counselor is super important. Understand your role. Know yourself. Realize that you are not perfect, okay? Make sure the same support person or nurse is not getting all of the bereaved families to work with, and that is very, very important. Sometimes I've even heard some of the students say, oh, I always take the patients that are, as a tech, I'm always one dealing with patients that are dying because that doesn't bother me. Well, whether it bothers you or not, you really need to make sure that you're not the one taking them all the time. it does take an emotional toll on you regardless, okay? So making sure that you all divvy that out appropriately in staffing so that, you know, if someone had the patient, if you know, obviously you don't always know when that's going to happen, but like in my line of work, when we have what we call an IUFD, an intrauterine fetal death, we know that the baby has deceased before delivery. We don't give the same nurse these patients over and over again. It's just too hard. It's way too hard emotionally. And so you kind of take turns, you know, taking care of these patients so that the nurses don't get burnt out or get the grief out. Right, so who's taking care of you? Be able to say no if you have insufficient energy left to deal with the bereaved family. Know your boundaries and limitations, because you will be of no help to the family if you have not taken care of yourself. Have a sense of humor. Take time to laugh and play. It's okay to be happy still, even when you're sad. You can't just be sad all the time. So you have to have that sense of humor in there as well. Have that balance. And take time to care for yourself. Remember, self-care is self-esteem. All right, and then here's just a little nurse's prayer. Lord, help me to bring comfort where there's pain, courage where there is despair, acceptance when the end is near, a gentle touch with tenderness, patience, and love. All right, one thing students usually ask me when I do this PowerPoint is about what's in the LPN scope of practice. So it is not within the scope of practice for the LPN to announce the death. A nurse, an RN, has to announce the death of a patient. You may be there, you may be the patient's nurse, and you can tell the RN, this patient has passed, but the RN or the physician has to actually announce the time of death and get the ball rolling on the process that they go through. Okay, so all this information, again, is testable, and I've got one more video PowerPoint to show you real quick, and be sure and let me know if you have any questions, okay? All right, the journey of loss, grief, and death still. Hopefully. Okay. Loss is the undesired change or removal of a valued object, person, or situation. Okay, we've seen this a lot in the news lately, all this devastation and loss from hurricanes and flooding and things like that. Just devastating for these families. All right, grief. Grief is the emotional response to a loss. It's manifested in ways unique to every individual. It's based on personal experiences, cultural expectations, and spiritual beliefs. So we can't say, oh, they're not grieving appropriately. We don't really know. It's individual to every person. But we do know, you just want to make sure they're kind of going through the steps and not getting stuck in a certain stage. All right, you do a grief, you do assessment and symptoms, assessing their feelings, their thought patterns, their physical sensations, and their behaviors. We have the theories of loss and grief done by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Okay, she died in 2004, but she's very, very well known, famous for death and dying. So the Kubler-Ross model is 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. You will need to know these and understand them and have the characteristics that go with them. All right, these stages are progressive. They do not have to go in order. So first one we have here is denial. This is a temporary defense that grants the client time to absorb the news of loss. The responses, we have behavioral and verbal responses. The patient may believe a wrong diagnosis. It helps in coping with the initial denial, helps in coping with the initial reality of dying. The nursing implications, we need to verbally support the client, but do not reinforce denial. And you need to examine your own behavior to ensure that you don't share in the client's denial. Okay, and then we've got anger. So anger is when the client no longer denies the loss, responding with misplaced feelings of rage accompanied by blame on others. So we have behavioral and verbal responses to this as well as nursing implications. Nursing implications, we need to help the client to see anger as a normal response. We need to avoid withdrawal or retaliation and provide structure to promote security for the patient. Allow the client as much control as possible in this phase in particular. All right, bargaining. This is when the client postpones their awareness of the loss by trying to prevent it from happening. The responses, again, are behavioral and verbal. Nursing implications, we need to listen attentively and encourage the client to talk and offer spiritual support if it's appropriate. Okay, these are things you hear about all the time. You know, if you'll let me live 2 more years, I'll do X, Y, and Z. Okay, it's kind of a bargaining. Then we've got depression. This is when the client realizes the full impact of the loss, leading to possible feelings of loneliness, helplessness, sadness, and withdraw from relationships. Again, we've got behavioral and verbal responses. And the nursing implications, we need to allow the client to express their sadness, communicate non-verbally by sitting quietly without expecting any conversation with the client. But we can convey caring touches if that's appropriate. All right, with acceptance, we've got the client comes to terms with their loss and finds ways to move forward. Again, behavioral and verbal, and the nursing implications that we help family and friends understand the client's decreased need to socialize. They don't need to have people around all the time. Encourage the client to participate as much as possible in the treatment progress and programs as are desired. And other nursing interventions, we've got therapeutic communication. Be careful what you say. You want to try to avoid cliches such as it's God's will, everything happens for a reason, you're so young, you can have more children, they say oftentimes when they have a miscarriage. You want to be honest, encourage questions, offer medical explanations, be sensitive to diverse needs, okay? Death and dying and grief is a multidisciplinary process. You have a client care team of the physicians, the nurses, the pastoral care, and social services. And then with the community, you have support groups within the community that help. All right? People are like stained glass windows. They sparkle and shine when the sun is out, but when the darkness sets in, their true beauty is revealed only if there's a light from within. That's from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, one of her quotes. Okay? So I know that was short and sweet, and all the information, though, can be found in your book. There will be, obviously, questions about this on the final, and we will have class next week as well. So be sure that you come prepared with any questions that you have on any of the lectures, all the way back to the very, very beginning. Okay?